This is what Fauci did. He pushed a vaccine, and the Biden administration pushed a vaccine booster that was risky for groups of individuals that he was recommending him for, or inappropriately risky or too risky. Big news this week as it relates to Dr. Anthony Fauci, the now retired former head of the National Institutes of Health's National Allergy and Infectious Disease sub-agency. He was the #1 government bureaucrat, arguably in the United States, for a period of time during COVID. And many of us have been concerned over his abuses of power, his misleading about gain of function, and all sorts of other issues related to the COVID lockdowns and the responses medically to dealing with the COVID pandemic challenges. Now, Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, released diaries, as it's been described, that were provided to him as a result of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s agency, HHS, which has oversight, which runs NIH, finding them on various servers. Now, they total about 1,000 pages, and there's been big news because there are few people who, after reviewing these diaries, think that Fauci is a credible figure. He's obsessed with his standing in the media. He's obsessed with his standing among the Washington elites. If you are on the wrong side bureaucratically in any debate, he is a vicious enemy. There are some good sides to him, as evidenced in the diaries as well. Of course, you know, they're diaries, so maybe he's purposely writing the good stuff, but he's seemingly a caring doctor for those he was caring for, and in some ways was trying to convey some health issues that I thought he had good faith reasons for pushing. But when you see the dishonesty as it relates to gain of function, when you see the political machinations and hypocrisy as it relates to the COVID shutdowns, vaccine safety, it's concerning and disturbing. And now the other frustrating thing is almost all of these documents were responsive to countless Freedom of Information Act lawsuits and requests filed by Judicial Watch. Now, if you've been following Judicial Watch for any length of time, you will know that Judicial Watch pretty much gave us everything through our FOIAs and our lawsuits, everything substantial we know about what Fauci was up to, whether it be the COVID issue, whether it be gain of function, or whether it be vaccines, et cetera. And so when I see diary entries that are government records, so these weren't personal records. He was doing this on government time, on government computers, and saving them to government systems. And I'm like, why weren't these produced to us? So that's frustrating. And of course, our lawyers will maybe litigate that as we examine the records. So they were about, as I said, about 1,100 pages of records. I have them here. And, you know, I'm kind of a nerd. I'm kind of a FOIA nerd. And I have to admit, I read every single one of the documents, every single page. And, yeah, 1,141 pages. And you may have seen a lot of discussion about what's in them as it relates to what he knew and when about gain of function. But I kind of summarized it in a tweet that I think will give you a good summary. I'll get into a few details. I don't want to repeat what others have said. I want to highlight issues that I think have been under highlighted by the media. I carefully reviewed the Fauci diary documents, almost all of which should have been produced to Judicial Watch in our federal FOIA lawsuits years ago. The documents confirm that Fauci knew early about the gain of function and lab leak issues tied to COVID, used his government position to try to destroy political opponents, secretly orchestrated shutdowns of our schools and economy despite knowing that children were not spreading COVID. Knew the WHO was bowing to communist China, failed to follow restrictions he sought to impose on other Americans, on every other American, hated conservatives, and worked hand in glove with the liberal media. The Fauci diaries further confirm the urgent need for a criminal investigation into the gain-of-function scandal and any other potential crimes arising from Dr. Fauci's misconduct. And I'll get into that issue a little bit more after I talk about these documents. I thought what was interesting in the documents was, among other things, and outrageously interesting in the sense that it exposed corruption and misconduct, in my view, is that, you know, Fauci made it clear the science was key. But there was a big issue when it came to the science with respect to what Joe Biden and the White House team wanted done with the third booster. So you had the initial vaccine, and then you're supposed to get another booster shot after that. And then on top of that, after those vaccines began to fail and wane in terms of efficacy, there was a recommendation to get a third booster. And the challenge was, by that time, it became inescapable that there was a documented risk to young people, particularly young men, of myocarditis as a result of the vaccine. And so from the medical immunological perspective, I don't pretend to be a doctor, but I did read these documents pretty carefully, and we studied these vaccine debates pretty carefully as well. Their analysis became, look, if you're going to get the vaccine, there's got to be a benefit that outweighs the risk of any side effect. And that's true for all medicines, right? You know, your doctor prescribes something. They know there are risks, but they think the benefits to you outweigh the risks. Same went with the vaccines, or it should have. So they wanted to have these boosters out there for everybody over 18. But the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, they have within them, within that agency, an advisory committee that basically put out what their view was as to who should get the vaccines. And it was called ACIP. I had to have it text to me so I could remember the acronym. It's short for Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices. So the White House and Fauci were very much concerned that ACIP and the CDC basically would recommend a more restricted vaccination recommendation than the FDA and the Fauci gang and the White House. Because the White House didn't want anyone to think there was any issue with the vaccines. That's how I'm interpreting the documents. Fauci thought that he didn't care about the risks. He wanted everyone to get the vaccines. And I think he really believed that. But it's one thing to say you really believe it, but you can't say that's my medical position and trust the science and then try to destroy or pressure scientists who don't agree with you to ignore their concerns and tell the public something that is not accurate in terms of the vaccine safety protocols or vaccine safety issues. And the documents are devastating in that regard. And I put out a tweet that I was able to pull. I was actually able to use AI effectively to help me pull the documents because I read them. I was like, I got to pull these out and share them with the people. Fauci vaccine scandal. Fauci and Biden White House, where furious CDC experts resisted broader vaccine booster recommendations because of myocarditis risks for young men. With White House, quote, counting on his influence, Fauci pressured CDC Director Rochelle Walensky to overrule key advisory committee and expand booster eligibility anyway. He then celebrated, Rochelle, listen to me. So the documents are pretty devastating. You can't see them on the document I pulled out, but I can go get some of the key documents here on the file itself. Here we are here. This is what I'm talking about. Now, Jeff Zients, I don't know how his name is pronounced, Z-I-E-N-T-S. He was helping the White House. He was basically running COVID for the Biden White House. And this is Fauci talking about this on, well, it looks like it was August of 2021. A very stressful day today, he says. An incredible and stressful evening tonight on the phone multiple times with Jeff and Rochelle, and then later with John Mascola. Poor Rochelle, and Rochelle is the head of the Centers for Disease Control, appointed by President Biden, then President Biden. She had been telling us all along, to Jeff that ACIP, that's the group of scientists and experts recommending vaccine protocols, would go along with what we were doing, which was boosters for everybody. Now that the leak has occurred, the ACIP is furious that we already decided what we want to do without consulting them. So they're like, you've got this process in place to help you decide how to make vaccines available and to who. We're the experts you say you're relying on, but you went ahead and did something anyway. And the leak was, we're going to have boosters for everyone. So they didn't even bother consulting the science before they made the political decision that we want boosters for everyone. And Jeff is being very rigid and getting a very clear, crisp message. That's the political side of it, of what the plan is. And when Rochelle heard that Natalie had asked her to put together a schedule of how to roll out the plan, she panicked, since this would actually push the ACIP over the line that they are being treated as a rubber stamp. So again, pressure from the White House on the CDC to relax the standard for vaccine availability despite the health risks. I called up Jeff and explained to him that we really need to pull back on the schedule issue. So there you have Fauci, like, doing the politics. Look, don't pressure the CDC too much, because we don't want to cause a rupture. After much discussion, in which he got very agitated but maintained his friendship and respect for me, we decided to call up Rochelle and Vivek Murtry, I believe, was Surgeon General, and have a Zoom conversation. He was furious with her because he said that she kept on telling him that they had ACIP in total alignment with what we're doing, and now all of a sudden ACIP is a problem. Why is ACIP a problem if you're relying them on advice? You know, this is the agency entity that you're saying we have to pay attention to the science, and they're a problem because they don't want to do what you've decided to do without asking them first or asking for their input first. And it goes on. Let's go to the next, page 873. I encourage you, by the way, to look at these materials. You know, you may have to kind of do a few Googling here and there to figure out what he's talking about. But believe me, if you've been following COVID to any great extent, the vaccine debates, the Fauci diaries are going to set your hair on fire. Okay, so the subject matter, and this is a bit later in the September, so this is a month later. So I think they wanted to get the boosters out in the fall, the third boosters of 2021. So they were having another, he says, I had a very heated and intense Zoom discussion this evening with the medical team as well as people from CDC, FDA, and HHS. And so he lists everyone involved. Subject matter of the intense discussion was trying to align the FDA with the CDC in the interpretation of data from Israel regarding the safety and efficacy of a third shot booster dose. It is clear from the Israel data that there is waning immunity across all the age groups, not only for infection protection, but also for protection against severe disease. So the vaccines that they told you would work stopped working. Hence the need for boosters, so they said. The sticking point, and this is the key phrase here, there's a key sentence. The sticking point is that the FDA pushes for approval of the third booster shot for all ages there's a question of a lack of data for safety among young individuals, particularly in the context of myocarditis. So here we are a month later, and the CDC is refusing to give in to the political pressure from Fauci, Jeff Zients, who was working for Biden, the White House, because they were concerned that the vaccines were going to hurt people of a certain age, young men, etc. It didn't mean that CDC was opposed to vaccines or these boosters for older people or people with comorbidity, people who otherwise had health issues. The CDC, particularly in the person of Amanda Fine, was very concerned that the ACIP would balk at recommending for younger individuals the third dose because there was not enough safety data. So what they were telling the Biden administration, namely Dr. Fauci, there wasn't enough safety data to, in good faith, recommend getting the booster for a certain age group. And I'm not going to give you a spoiler here because you know what happened. They did it anyway. They did it anyway. And you know how it got done? Fauci. I mean, this is the sort of stuff, by the way, that Fauci was saving on his diary. Look at this. I'm sure I just can't imagine seeing that type of material about oneself. And this is just one example. Oh, people want to make you a saint. And like saving it. Evidently, he was trying to do a book, or, he was saving all this material for a book. Why would you even think of putting this stuff in a book? It's very strange. But, people have vanity, so it's very strange. Nevertheless, it's strange. I don't know how else to describe it. Here it is again on November. So this is November. In August, there was concern. In September, there was concern. In November 2021, there was concern about the booster vaccine safety profile. Pfizer announced yesterday they were going to ask the FDA to approve a EUA, again, remember, emergency use authorization, boosters for everyone 18 years and older. There is still concern on the part of Rochelle, and Rochelle being Rochelle Lewinsky, the head of the CDC, that the ACIP will not recommend boosters for everyone, but would hold back on younger individuals, particularly young men, because of risk of myocarditis. And he says, I disagree. I've been pushing hard within the medical group, as well as publicly saying that given the fact we have plateaued on cases at around 70,000 per day, we've already lost 750,000 Americans. We should clearly boost everyone. This is a situation, he writes in bold, where I am clearly at odds with the conservative approach at the ACIP. I thought we weren't allowed to question the science, Dr. Fauci. Remember how he infamously said, I am the science? Or thereabouts? Now let's get to the pressure campaign. Let's get to the pressure campaign directly on Walensky, because this is going to be incredible to you. As I said, the White House was, and this is a quote from the diary that Fauci wrote. The White House was counting on Fauci's ability to pressure Walensky. And here's the big document. It's a killer. This is September. So the last one I read was from November. So for whatever reason, this came later or earlier. So it turned out in September, the ACIP, the CDC expert group, recommended restrictions for the vaccine based on the health issues that we talked about. That young people were more likely to, including especially young men, to have a risk of myocarditis, and so the risk-benefit profile was negative for them. It was more risky to take the vaccine than the benefit that would arise than the benefit that would have been gained from taking it. So it's just a straightforward analysis, and Fauci and the White House went crazy. Highly eventful day. Today was the day the ACAP would make their recommendations to the CDC regarding the use of boosters. Inexplicably, it wasn't inexplicable. They voted to allow boosters for people 65 years of age or older, which is fine, as well as those from 18 to 64 with underlying conditions leading to severe disease, which is fine. However, they rejected the proposal to give boosters to people who by occupational or institutional exposure would find themselves at high risk for infection because of the safety issues. There's, the benefit of getting the booster under the ACIP's analysis was, look, if you have a severe medical issue, your getting COVID would be a big negative and greatly increase the risk to your health. Therefore, you should take the booster. So the side effect risks of the booster are worth it. What they're saying here is, if you don't have an underlying health issue and you're young, relatively speaking, you shouldn't take the booster. It's not worth it. And, quote, being a teacher isn't a health risk. I mean, that's just, Fauci goes on to talk about a teacher can't get a booster. No, they can't, or they shouldn't, at least under the so-called science that Fauci keeps on telling us to worship. I texted, again, when I heard that, so all of the people were outraged. The Surgeon General was outraged, a political appointee of Biden. Jeff Zients, who was the operational head of the COVID response, was outraged. So it's the Biden White House was outraged. So Fauci calls Rochelle Walensky. I texted Rochelle and I begged her to call me in order that I could explain to her how this would be a fatal mistake as she took the recommendation of the ACIP, since none of us would be able to defend this. It was a very dramatic situation where she was in with the secretary, and I was texting her late in the evening to call me so that I can tell her what I feel she must do. And his colleagues were telling him to call the Secretary of Health, Sarah, and go over Rochelle's head. I finally got a decision to, let me see here. Things were getting very dicey since the hours were going by and no decision was made. I finally got a chance to speak with Rochelle and literally begged her to override that decision, which was only a 9-6 decision, as if that makes a difference, and not an overwhelming unanimous recommendation. Yet Rochelle still felt she could not go against the committee. I pleaded with her over the phone, telling her I thought I would absolutely strongly defend her publicly if she made allowance for teachers and healthcare workers to get vaccinated even though they were healthy. Again, she seemed hesitant to overrule the science, or the committee, the ACIP committee. Jeff called me multiple times asking me to call the secretary myself. So the White House essentially was calling Fauci to tell him to call the Secretary of Health and Human Services to put pressure on Walensky as well. I felt that I could not do this since it would be totally destroying to Rochelle if I did that. I explained to Rochelle that if she does not do that, she would forever be branded as someone with no leadership capabilities at all. And if she did overrule them, she could turn lemons into lemonade because she could reclaim her role as a leader, since her reputation is one of, unfortunately, being a very weak leader. But what the heck is going on? The whole team in the department and the White House is counting on my influence on her to get her to do the right thing here. I cannot understand why she is so reluctant to go against the 9-6 recommendation when the recommendation is so blatantly incorrect. Well, obviously it's not blatantly incorrect. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see the logic. I've explained it. The vaccine boosters had risks. The expert panel at the CDC thought the risks for certain young people, healthy, essentially, if you were healthy, outweighed the benefit in terms of getting a booster. And then look what happened the next day. Here, look at the diary entry. Alas, Rochelle listened to me. She overruled the recommendation of the ACIP. She actually called me last night at 11:25. They missed each other. I congratulated her on what she had done and told her that she has now shown clear leadership, and her recommendations are indicated below. And basically, she caved completely. She overruled the expert committee designed to provide advice to the American people and to the medical community about who should get vaccinations and on other matters. And it's not to say the ACIP is the end-all and be-all. It's Fauci who was telling us these types of bodies were the end-all and be-all. And what he was doing was engaged in a political game with Joe Biden to put out a vaccine that he had good reason to know, based on the recommendations of the ACIP, was dangerous to groups of individuals, specifically younger people. Maybe dangerous overstates it. They were potentially dangerous. The risk of getting it, the risk of taking it, the side effect risk profile was too high given the benefit. So this is what Fauci did. He pushed a vaccine, and the Biden administration pushed a vaccine booster that was risky for groups of individuals that he was recommending him for, or inappropriately risky or too risky. So how many people were injured as a result of this decision? I'd like to know. I mean, there's all sorts of, I could spend, well, it's 1,000 pages. I could spend 1,000 hours talking about this. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.